Feminism is my religion. I wouldn't know how to think without it.
I came out as a crazy person. I came out as a gay person. My elder sister says, "Oh my God, what's she done now?"
Did you call it patriarchy? Did you call it capitalism? What was the problem?
We just sort of said it was men.
I'm 79 years old.
I have just turned 60.
It pains me to say. How did it happen that I am 73 years old?
And I'm now 67.
Do you want to put the first one on for us, Sheila?
Out of the night.
In the late 1960s, women in Britain and America began to fight for women's liberation. This political struggle resulted in the fastest and most significant transformation in women's lives there has ever been.
Good.
You see, I am woman. I am woman.
Women from very different backgrounds came together in a wave of activism, hoping to put an end to their oppression. Their sense of solidarity and shared purpose lasted a decade.
To go back.
Glad you dropped in. Amazing, isn't it? Look at that. And she did the washing and ironing today for a family of 5.
Can you describe for me what the situation was like for women in America in the 1950s? How constrained were your choices as a woman?
Well, they were totally constrained when it came to anything in the outside world. In those days, jobs were listed by sex, and the only jobs available to women were secretary or clerk, sales clerk or file clerk. And I had a college degree, and I was a very, very bright student. And it made absolutely no difference. Not one of my professors even thought of helping me. They expected me to get married, so I did. I really didn't know what else to do.
Can you tell me how old you were when you were married?
I was 20, and then I had the children when I was 25 and 26.
Were you a good housewife?
Wonderful. I'm very efficient. I'm very neat by nature.
And did you enjoy all that drudgery?
I didn't mind it. What I minded was being limited to it. I was married to a man who was quite ill, I think. A kind of a Jekyll and Hyde. And his furies just became intolerable. But I couldn't leave him. There was no place for me to go. There was no way I could support myself and the children. I was not about to leave the children. So I stayed 17 years. I made up my mind at that moment I would never, never put myself in a position of having a man have control over me ever again as long as I lived. And I never did.
People used to bill and coo, but that don't make it with you, 'cause there's other things we do in our time, baby, in our time, yeah, in our time, baby, in our time.
it was considered unnatural for a woman to want to have a career. That was considered a manly aspiration. So women thought something was wrong with them for wanting to have meaningful work. And I think that a lot of women resolved it by becoming very insecure, embittered, extremely neurotic, you know, because they couldn't fulfill themselves.
You were 33 in 1968. So how come you weren't already married with a couple of kids?
I think men thought I was a bad bet. I think they knew that I had my own ambitions, and I did want to write books. I couldn't deny that.
But were you under pressure? Was your family expecting you to just settle down?
No, I think they thought that I might be unmarriageable. I resisted feeling like an unnatural woman because I wanted to have a career. But it was something that I think all women then kept very private. They didn't talk about it publicly because they were half convinced that something was wrong, that we shouldn't be thinking these thoughts. We should find our total satisfaction in marriage and motherhood.
In 1969, you were married, you had 2 children, you had a degree. So you kind of achieved everything that a woman was supposed to have achieved by then, probably.
Yes, I suppose so. And like many women at the time, I found this strangely unsatisfying. And that was one of the reasons for the birth of the women's movement then, I think. It is a wonderful thing to have children and to be in the position of enjoying them and looking after them and so on. But it is, along with that, in this culture goes, or went then certainly, the expectation that you would spend a lot of time cleaning lavatories, cooking meals, looking after husbands, providing a general kind of domestic and caring role for everybody else. And that actually has nothing to do with motherhood as such. And it was this contradiction that I think that a lot of the early women's liberationists in this country were drawing attention to.
The feminists who are here tonight do not believe a woman's place is in the home, right?
Of course not. It's a very oppressive concept. It's being used to oppress women and to make them think they're lucky to be slaves.
How many women in the home are slaves?
All women are slaves.
The movement seemed to appear out of nowhere, and I can remember people on the left saying, where did you recruit them?
As Mrs. Pankhurst said, enough's enough. Change a railing, she would do a slut. Nowadays, a woman out for justice starts the fight for freedom where her bust is.
But when the news got out, even when it was hostile coverage, women were attracted because it somehow struck a chord. And that is the great mystery of history. Why should it be striking a chord when women hear about these groups forming?
We want equality. We want equality. This is no feminine frivolity. We'd like some recognition for our status. We weren't put on this earth to peel potatoes. It's very clear we are.
Tell me about the very first exposure you had to the women's movement.
The very first meeting that I went to was a night where, quite by accident, the subject turned around to the subject of abortion. Every woman spoke, and she spoke from her personal experience. They were all talking about one abortion, and in my usual competitive way, I said, it just came out of me. I said, I've had 3 abortions, illegal, and the most recent one was 6 months ago in Puerto Rico. I had to travel to Puerto Rico, couldn't find anyone in New York. And my best friend Jan is sitting here, and I never told her I went. And then I realized the enormity of what we were all saying, that we all had these private experiences that we would never say aloud to our best friends. And that's what consciousness raising was all about, to find out that collective women's experience and then do something about it.
It was, small group, 5 or 6 of us. And that was 70 or 71.
And what did you do in your small group?
Talked. Very exhausting it was. We talked about our lives and our experiences as women, and the central element in this was discovering that all these feelings and thoughts that you had, that you thought were just your own individual thoughts, experiences, and there was something wrong with you, everybody else in the group had them too.
How long did you do consciousness raising for, Susan?
It seems it was years. Yeah, it was...
Well, it felt like years or it was years?
Well, both. It was years and it felt like years. Because we would start with things that were kind of tiny, but not so tiny. Like, why do we smile so much? Why do we try to be so appealing? Why are we so afraid to show our anger? Why is anger considered not feminine? There was always something to discuss. We kept at it.
I was in those small consciousness-raising groups, but at first, with my characteristic arrogance, I thought I was in them not because I was oppressed, but rather because I was going to bring them real politics. They needed an economic analysis. They needed Marx, they needed Engels, they needed all those things that I could bring them. And thank the goddess, they got to me before I got to them.
I was in a group which was a rather swotty group, actually, because we wanted to read about anthropology. And I had the idea that somehow or other anthropology provided some mystery key. Anyway, we all sat down and read Engels. Then we read Simone de Beauvoir. And so we read things and discussed them. And then we would have these heart-rending sessions about saying, we're not a proper consciousness-raising group like the Americans. We need to talk more personally.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of America's leading feminists and novelists, Marilyn French. Can I ask you first what your definition is of a feminist?
Well, I think there are different kinds of feminists. I think the basic definition I would use is any person, female or male, who does not believe in male supremacy is a feminist.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a very good answer.
Yeah. I think there are many branches within that. There are things that I distinguish. For instance, I distinguish political feminism from philosophical feminism.
Mm-hmm. How did you become one of the, as they call you, the major exponents of day-to-day feminism? Because you're not a militant or a political feminist, really,
I'm extremely political.
You are? Oh.
But in my feelings.
Yes.
I'm not a political person. I'm a writer who requires silence and solitude.
I oppose male privilege. I oppose the idea that men are superior to women. I don't think men should have privilege of any kind over women. In my life, as I have lived it, as I have seen it around me, it is the women who worry about the children. It is the women who keep the family going. It is the women who have kept the world going while men are off killing each other and a lot of us along the way. I'm sick of it. I've always been sick of it.
Marilyn French's novel, The Women's Room, was the highly autobiographical story of a woman who revolts against the constraints of domesticity. Written in the 1960s, it took many years to find a publisher, but went on to sell 20 million copies worldwide.
I was telling the truth about women's lives in a way it had never been told. Because novels about women do not tell the truth. They don't tell the truth about the place of what housework is in a woman's life. They don't tell the truth about what it feels like to be prey, to be always subordinate. They just don't. And they always focus on men, as though a man is going to save you. No man is going to save you from this.
A woman's lot is to give and give, and go on giving. A woman's got to love and lose, and go on living. Well, I was born a woman, I didn't have no say. Well, I was born a woman.
And their fear was that women would leave their husbands and women would
Well,
discover
they
their
did.
independence.
A lot of them did. It wasn't just a fear.
So the book really inspired enormous numbers of women to find their own feet.
Yes, it did.
And did those women write to you?
Oh, God, yes. Hundreds and hundreds of letters. Just poured their hearts out, you know, letters 12 and 14 pages long.
It must have felt like you'd unleashed a tidal wave of female anguish.
Yes, I did.
And did you feel proud of that?
No, I felt anguished. I felt their anguish. It was very painful.
How did you account for women's subordination? What was your explanation for why women were oppressed?
We thought it was a mixture of men and capitalism. It seemed to me that if you were going to change women's position, you needed to change the society. I consider the solution to exploitation and oppression to be communism, despite the hollow resonance the word has acquired. It seems to me that the cultural and economic liberation of women is inseparable from the creation of a society in which all people no longer have their lives stolen from them.
Before she was a feminist, Sheila Rowbotham was a socialist. When she joined the women's liberation movement, she brought her left-wing principles with her, and always believed that female emancipation would only come about if working-class women were politicised too.
I thought the working class was the key to change.
But as a middle-class educated woman yourself, why did that seem the place to go to mobilise?
It seemed important that women's liberation wasn't only middle-class women. And the thing that was probably personally really, really important to me for 2-3 years was being involved in trying to unionise night cleaners in London.
And I say to all of you, get out and fight now and show the men we're not the fragile little things we once were and they think we still are.
In America, Robin Morgan also came to feminism, initially through left-wing activism. What kind of left-wing politics did you espouse? Were you hoping for a socialist revolution?
Any kind.
Morgan became more and more committed to overthrowing the state. So much so that she briefly became involved in armed struggle.
It seemed chic and sexy to be part of an uprising, violent underground. I was very fortunate in that I never killed anybody. The violence that I did was against property. The pace was relentless, and you didn't stop long enough to question. And the women were hustling around, carrying guns, trying for male approval anywhere you could get. You want me to carry a gun? I'll carry a gun. You want me to have babies? I'll do that. What do I need to do? You know, until some women began to say, wait a minute. Just wait a minute. This is really not the revolution, the kind of revolutionary change that I thought I was involved in.
As Morgan became disillusioned with the sexism of her fellow revolutionaries, she became involved instead with the fledgling women's liberation movement in New York.
Well, my next guest is a young wife, soon to be a mother. She is an editor with the New York Publishing Company, and as an active member of the women's liberation movement, she feels that women haven't come far enough, baby. So would you welcome, please, Robin Morgan. Robin?
I think that Miss Morgan has forgotten that for a woman, there's great dignity in just being a woman.
I think that Mr. Ford has maybe forgotten that for a human being, there's great dignity in just being a human being.
Why can't you be a human being and a woman, too?
Well, that's what we want to try, you know? We've never really been allowed to.
Miss Illinois is Miss America. We are going to sing your song. Oh, there she is, Miss America.
It was Robin Morgan in 1968 who organised women's liberation's very first public protest, a demonstration against the beauty pageant Miss America.
I organized that demonstration, and I wrote the letters for, to get the permits from the boardwalk. And we had thought, our small little group, that there would probably be maybe 30 or 40 of us. And I had ordered something like 2 buses, and then had to order many more at the last minute. It took off like wildfire. There are things I regret about it. We crowned a live sheep. We had rented a sheep from New Jersey, and we paraded her around the U and crowned her. And I didn't quite have my animal rights consciousness in order at that point, so I'm not terribly proud of that. Although I will say we got her shade and water and hay.
I misunderstood that because I'd read that you regretted crowning the sheep, but I thought that was because you thought that it was insulting to the women.
Well, that too.
In 1970, another group of activists decided to organise a sit-in that would similarly challenge existing social stereotypes of women. Susan Brown Miller was by now devoting herself full-time to feminist activism, and she led the demonstration.
We were occupying a ladies' magazine, a women's magazine, edited by a man, as most of them were in those days.
Do you feel that Ladies' Home Journal, being geared to a specific type of woman, is representative of the American way of life for the average woman in this country?
Yes, I do.
Would you elaborate on that, please?
No.
They were feeding women propaganda that was against women's interests.
And the next month you ran an article on Jacqueline Kennedy's New York apartment. Now, we feel that these articles are wish fulfillment articles for your readers who don't live the way Jacqueline Kennedy and Elizabeth Taylor lived. They don't have those jewels. They will never get them. And we think it's a cruel delusion to put these women up as models for them to try to emulate.
It creates a gap of frustration.
Yeah, it's a very inhuman thing to do, to try to make them live vicariously through people like Jacqueline Kennedy.
Also to make them think that that's something to work towards, finding a man who will give them those jewels.
And it was successful.
Yes, at the end of 11 hours, John Mac Carter, the editor-in-chief, agreed that he would give us 8 pages of the magazine in the August issue, and we would write the content, and they wouldn't change our content. Yeah.
Anybody want to sign coming on unit? Anyone want a signed copy of the female eunuch?
Germaine Greer was born in a bush, so the flyleaf of her book says.
In a bushfire.
In a bushfire. I'm off to a good start.
Germaine Greer shot to fame in both Britain and America when she published The Female Eunuch in 1970. The book argued that women were, as she put it, castrated because they were conditioned to be so completely passive in relation to their own sexuality. Greer encouraged women to rediscover their authentic sexual appetites in order to free themselves as human beings.
I've never seen any definition which refers to women when you come to eunuch. It's always a man who's castrated. It's impossible to castrate a woman, at least as far as the definition is concerned, in a dictionary.
It's only impossible to castrate a woman because it's assumed that she has no sex from the outset, because she's assumed to be a castrated thing from the outset. I mean, I didn't castrate women. Freud did. I mean, he's the first one to talk about the castration complex. I didn't invent that. But I just take issue with Freud on that basic thing. Because I say that just as a bullock doesn't know what it's like to be a bull and doesn't know what he's missing, so women who live in the normal circumstances in our society don't know what it's like to be really female and really human and really in control of all their potential.
What I was really interested in was energy, élan vital, and energy and libido seemed to me to be completely coextensive. The two things go together, desire. To put women in touch with the idea that they had the right to want things and to go and get them. People are always turning on me and saying, why do you want to upset all these young housewives who are happy having their babies and blah, blah, blah. And I have to say, look, I don't want to upset all these happy young housewives. There are thousands upon thousands, millions of other women who are not in the least happy and who are yelling for help.
Were you ever actively involved in the women's liberation movement?
Well, it depends whether I was actively involved in the women's liberation movement. Depends on what you think the women's liberation movement was. I've never been a tremendous fan of marching. Apart from anything else, I used to get quite frightened. And marching strikes me as counterproductive. It's so hard to organise and it's so exhausting. And it gives the powers that be a pretty good view of just how small the operation is. If you can really muster 500,000 people, then march. If you can't, then don't. And we were constantly marching from a position of massive weakness and walking miles too far.
I do like demonstrations. I really like demonstrations. There's a kind of, it's like kind of some sort of old warrior now been called and things. When I get on a demonstration, like, whoa, here we are.
For some of us, collective action is easier. For me, it's very, very difficult.
Why is it difficult for you?
Oh, just because I can't be bothered.
Germaine, that's a lovely name. What does it mean?
Well, it's part of a whole family of names derived from the Latin, which mean from the same seed. That is to say, sister. Mi hermana is my sister. So I'm everybody's sister. How about that?
That's good.
Were you ever a sisterly person, Germaine, or did the whole idea of sisterhood annoy you?
It's difficult, sisterhood. Anyone will tell you that. Relationships between women are bloody difficult. We've spent centuries being pitted against each other, in competition with each other for male attention, whether it's the attention of our fathers or the attention of men in general or whatever. And it's not there. It isn't there. I mean, if I'm standing on the underground train and a man puts his hand between my legs and I say, "Get your hand out from between my legs," well, the other women go, "You bastard." Will they hiss? No. They'll stand there pretending they didn't hear me. That's just crap.
For activists, however, sisterhood was thriving. Not only were women engaging in successful protests and demonstrations, but feminist intellectuals were also looking at how society came to be organised along such sexist lines. Anne Oakley had given up full-time motherhood to become a social scientist.
What was striking, particularly striking to me then, was reading a lot of anthropological studies, how tremendously variable all these definitions of masculinity and femininity are. So the idea that women have to do the housework, men have to go out and go to work because they hunt the animals. This is all huge. It's not just an oversimplification, it's actually a myth.
Oakley's research showed that masculine and feminine attributes were a result of social conditioning. She was the first person to insist that although sex might be determined by biology, gender is not. This was an entirely new concept. OK, so I'm going to ask some really basic questions. What is my sex?
Well, I don't know. You could have changed sex, I need to look at your birth certificate.
Well, OK, what do you think my sex is, Anne?
I think you're probably female.
And what's my gender?
I don't know you well enough to say that.
From the evidence that you are aware of, is anything set by biology other than kind of how our bodies function?
I think very little. 3 political statements point the way to the liberation of housewives. The housewife role must be abolished, the family must be abolished, gender roles must be abolished.
Were you against the family as an institution at that time?
There was quite a bit of suspicion of a family. I had a family in which I wouldn't say my mother and father had been that happy, and I didn't really see that the family was something that I wanted to hang on to. The problem was that we didn't think through was quite how else did you bring up children. If it were admitted that the family is maintained at the expense of women, capitalism would have to devise some other way of getting the work done.
You're my photogenic model from the glossy magazine. In among your kitchen structure, soapy water washing machine.
There was a young lady of Wapping whose life was all cleaning and shopping. Her husband said jokingly, "Try reading Anne Oakley," and she did and left home without stopping.
Did women at that point really transform their sexual lives, do you think?
Yes, I do. I think that women grew to be more assertive sexually and be able to articulate what they wanted. Yeah.
So some of the early imports from America, one was Anne Kurt's paper on the myth of the vaginal orgasm. Did that have any impact on you in your life?
I found it a bit bewildering, actually.
As I understand it, it was a big deal, that paper, because it was saying that the way that people had had sex up to then, where a man would have to have penetrative sex with a woman and expect her to orgasm, this was a kind of a revolutionary document, because it was saying, well, actually it's very hard to achieve orgasm like that, and women's sexuality is more complicated, and most women have clitoral orgasms, and women can have much more rewarding sex lives if this were to be acknowledged. So that seems like quite a big and important thing.
It never had a big impression on me. I never really went along with this clitoral thing. I mean, I think
so you were one of the lucky ones who was already having vaginal orgasms.
I didn't at first have orgasms when I first met somebody, and then when I stopped being so worried about contraception, I did.
Did that change your life, Anne?
No.
Why not?
Well, why should it? Why should it?
I don't know, it depends what kind of orgasms you were having at the time.
Yes, well, I know you'd like me to talk about that, but I'm not going to.
Did it transform your sexual life, Susan?
No. I'd gotten there already. It was the only kind of orgasm I could have was a clitoral orgasm.
An orgasm, is relatively easy to get. We've made all this fuss and bother about orgasms. We've carried on a treat about orgasms. We've made a whole culture out of the chasse à l'orgasme. It's easy. It's a cinch to have an orgasm. I can give an orgasm to the cat.
Also from the early 70s, there was very much a movement about women taking control of their own bodies.
The slogan was first raised in the pro-abortion movement, "Our bodies belong to ourselves," which replaced some other infelicitous phrases like lawmakers, get your hands out of my uterus.
Girls and secretaries, working women and wives, we must control our bodies to control our lives. If we have children, we want them to be planned. What we want is abortion, abortion on demand.
And there was women as well who were doing abortion.
Yes. It's not brain surgery to do a first trimester abortion.
Lynn Alderson was a radical anarcho-feminist. She was part of the collective that ran a well-known feminist bookshop in London called Sister Right. The bookshop imported many women's liberation pamphlets from America.
Thing came over from the States about menstrual extraction, which for a while we got very excited about.
What does that mean?
It was about the possibility of removing periods rather than having to, live through every period, causing us a lot of pain and distress. And this was thought to be a real possibility at one point. And indeed...
Can you just be a bit more explicit? What did it actually involve?
Okay, well, you use a cannula and you take out the deposits inside the cervix as a way of getting it all out at once rather than having it coming out over a period of days.
So on the first day of your period, you suck out all your menstrual blood in one go?
Obviously, that's very linked to the method for doing abortions. Some women also thought that was a way that maybe you could just do very early abortions involving cannulas, and the fridge motors actually were the way was the suction involved. They adapted fridge motors.
What is a cannula?
A cannula is a sort of tube with a little hole in the end that gets inserted into the cervix.
And so did people...
You need a speculum as well.
Right, so you need a speculum and a cannula to do menstrual extraction.
Yes, and you need a fridge motor to do an abortion.
When I first heard about it, I kind of, was startled. I thought, this is not right. This isn't something feminists do. And then, I came to understand how wonderful their contribution was especially to demystify abortion and not charge anything, for doing it. They were heroines.
Not only did women want to control their own bodies, they also wanted to live without the threat of male violence.
We're continuously the victims of violence, murder, rape, corrupting children.
Or
and so
just
on.
being beaten up.
Or being beaten.
Or physically threatened.
And we're always physically threatened, like we're threatened, and even, we're so liberated we go out at night wherever we want to, but it isn't another woman who's going to hit us on the head, who's going to rape us or knife us or kill us.
there is no question that men are predatory on women. Women are prey. They start to be prey when they're 8 or 10 or 11 years old. I mean, women are frightened when they walk on a city street or any street at night. They're frightened of any man at all. He may not be a danger, but he may. We know we are prey. And that's a horrible knowledge to live with about your own species.
Rape is nothing more or less than a conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in a state of fear. It doesn't mean, as some people wanted me to say I believe, which would have been ridiculous, that all men rape. All men don't rape. Those who do keep the rest of us all in a state of fear.
Susan Brown Miller spent 5 years researching and writing a history of rape. Her classic feminist book, Against Our Will, was published in 1975. It was the first book to identify rape as an expression of male power rather than as an isolated sexual act.
What surprised me was that I thought I'd be more popular after publishing this book, because that's what happens to male writers. You know, they get all this attention from women, but it doesn't work in reverse. I would say categorically that men are not attracted to women who write books to begin with, but certainly they're not attracted to women who write books on rape. And it was Robin Morgan who first enlightened me on this. When she said, "How's your life going?" I said, "I seem to be less popular with men than I ever have been, Robin." And she said, "Poor baby, you really thought writing a book on rape would make you popular with men?"
Your daughter was raped in 1971. Can you tell me about that and the impact that that had on you?
Well, of course, I was very upset. But she became really quite catatonic.
How old was she, Marilyn?
18. But she was emotionally really a little girl. She was just a little girl. She was so innocent. She still is. She's 50-odd years old, and she still is.
It would make sense if you had a lot of rage and anger towards
I did,
men.
yes, indeed, I did. It's been kind of beaten out of me. When you're as sick as I've been, you give up anger. It doesn't help you in any way. And of course, it's out of fashion.
For most of your life, you have been quite an angry person,
Yes,
haven't
I
you?
certainly have.
Is that your personality or because the world is an unjust place?
Who knows? I don't know.
If I had to, I could face anything. I am woman, he is wrong. The number's too big to ignore. And I know too much to go back and pretend. 'Cause I've heard it all before. I've been down there on the floor. No one's ever gonna keep me down again.
All women are lesbians, except those who don't know it naturally. They are, but don't know it yet. I am a woman and therefore a lesbian. I am a woman who is a lesbian because I am a woman, and a woman who loves herself.
Within the women's movement, there was a discussion, quite a heated discussion, I think, about whether or not women should adopt lesbianism as a political identity. Was that something you ever considered or tried?
Oh yeah, I thought about it. But it seemed to me fairly pointless to do something that you didn't particularly want to do for the sake of political correctness.
So you never gave it a go, Anne?
I never gave it a go. Except on an emotional level.
In a one-sex movement, there's no other place to put your emotions. No other, you go to meetings all the time. These are the people you see. It's very exciting. You know, you might find yourself flirting. And to break off from your past life, even to divorce a husband and to become an active feminist, you know, could leave you lonely emotionally. So a lot of people did try to see if it was a fit, you know. And for some it was, and it was where they should have been all along, and for others it wasn't.
Till all women are lesbians, there will be no true political revolution.
Did you ever think you should consider it or try it?
No. I think I tried it once briefly at college. No, I'd gotten that out of my system. The problem for straight women in the women's movement then was that there was this very loud chorus of people saying, come out, come out, come out. Forget men, just come over to us.
Once I got deeply involved with feminism, well, two things happened, really. I met all these completely wonderful, dazzling women. I was half in love with the women's movement and half in love with them, and that was a very powerful force. When you were doing everything together, when you were working together, you're doing your politics together, you were living together. And it was a very passionate encounter on all levels. Then it became the natural context for being a lesbian, for exploring my relationships with women on a deeper level.
I am strong. I am invincible. I am woman. One more time, quick now.
Did you ever consider or try lesbianism?
No, I have, to all conscious knowledge, always being heterosexual.
I wish that I had been a lover of women. I think it's difficult for heterosexual women because there are some aspects of the heterosexual negotiation that are immutable.
I have been a lesbian. I tried it. I always thought it would be the ideal thing because I get along so well with women. But it doesn't work unless you're really there. And if you're not, you're being insulting to other women, really. It's not a nice thing to do.
When did you become a lesbian for real, Robin?
Well, I don't know to this. I don't know what I am.
Do you call yourself a lesbian?
No, I call myself a poet.
As well as pressure on women within the movement to become lesbians, there was also total opposition to any patriarchal notion of hierarchy.
The movement was ferociously egalitarian, and the politics for that came very much from civil rights and from the American New Left.
And how did that work in practice? So if, let's say, you were invited to go and talk somewhere, how did you avoid becoming a star?
Well, in Britain in the early days, we would be asked to come and speak, and very often we went in twos, even threes. Although it was a bit difficult to arrange sometimes, we did do that. And it sort of taught people how to speak because you didn't feel it was just up to you as an individual.
When my book got all its publicity in 1975, you know, and I was speaking at the University of Massachusetts, and a woman got up and she said, "Oh, your ideas are the movement's ideas. How can you put your name on this book?"
I do remember when my first book was published, feeling that it wasn't a good thing to try and celebrate this in the group that I was in. So I didn't mention it. And now I think that's rather sad.
I like your Crocs, Kate. Good, aren't they?
Aren't they the greatest?
Yeah.
They are really the best shoes in the world. I'm never going to wear anything else all winter, I think, because they're warm on the inside.
Yes.
They're winter Crocs. My niece Katie gave them to me.
Kate Millett lives in upstate New York and nowadays supports herself by farming Christmas trees. Having done a PhD in English literature in the late 60s, by the early 70s she was married and living as an artist in Manhattan.
When I was 5 years old, I kind of noticed that everybody was a guy, like George Washington and Jesus Christ and the Pope and all the rest of them. The presidents and so forth were all men.
As feminists, what we believe in is very simple, and that is the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. Now, therefore, we are in politics, you see, because the relationship between the sexes is in fact a political relationship.
In 1970, you published Sexual Politics, when you were 34 then.
Yeah.
But you were very clear in that book that you were very critical of romantic love, against monogamous marriage. You call for an end to the family.
Let's face it, I mean, everybody has relatives and people who are gay or people who are living together and aren't married, and then somebody has a mistress on the side or a lover on the side. I mean, this has been going on for a million years. It isn't news to anybody.
When the book first came out, Kate, and you were hailed as a big star, weren't you?
Well, yes, always mistakenly. They called me the Mao Zedong of the women's movement. What an awful thing to be, the Mao Zedong. I mean, that guy killed 30 million people. I mean, gee whiz, thanks a lot.
You say there are no leaders in the women's movement, but wouldn't you acknowledge that you have been a leader and that has somehow changed your life?
Well, I'm an advocate, and I have a certain influence because I write, and that's all right. I think that's certain, validity and authenticity in that. I'm not the head of any organization. I don't make policy, and I don't tell anybody what to do. There's nobody behind me.
Wouldn't it be awful if we had a women's movement with generals, lieutenants, colonels, captains, and so on and so forth? If you've got that, if you've got a head, you can cut the head off, right? If they're all of us, there is no way to put us down or put us out of business. I saw this very clearly when they attempted, having put me and my face upon a balloon, Time magazine's cover and so forth. Then they said, oh my God, we just discovered she's a queer. So everything she wrote is nonsense and scrambled thinking.
But the feminists who attacked you at that time, they attacked you because at the time there was a notion that they were not supposed to be any leaders or any stars.
Oh, yeah. When people are oppressed, they get used to oppression. And one of them sticks their head up, they say, get your head down, shut up. So that went on for a while. And then I tried another transgression, it seems, because I said I'd slept with women. Well, that was a big sensation. If you say that in France, the next day everyone congratulates you on the street. But in America, they throw things at you.
You were subject to a sort of character assassination in the press because a homophobic character assassination.
I've been assaulted by all sorts of things.
How do you feel about having sexual relationships with men?
Well, I was married to a man for 10 years and adored him.
I mean today, now.
No, I think it's women for me now, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the controversial positions you've taken, of course. And I don't mean to say...
Well, it is indeed,
It certainly is.
Yeah. We're at the end of a period of masculine rule, quite harsh at times.
What's going to happen to men? They're going to become drones in this society?
Well, do you either have to run things or not?
Well,
I think we're entering on a period where the sexes will be on an egalitarian footing, which they perhaps once were.
Aren't you doing some damage to the family when you move in that direction?
Well, if you posit a sort of patriarchal, authoritarian family, sure.
It sounds as though you had a huge amount of fame, but that after about 4 months, you'd been so attacked that it was very difficult for you, and then you got ill and you were kind of isolated and...
Well, yeah, I'm kind of isolated always, because if you're, a little bit ahead of the pack, it takes a while. Don't get too famous. Because, that's the worst thing, is getting too famous. because then you're just a mark and everybody just shoots at you because you're a convenience.
Kate, did the women's movement drive you crazy?
Well, it drives everybody crazy. I mean, revolution drives you crazy. You could get killed for it, too.
Movements are tough to work in. Yeah. Those who survived had nerves of steel.
I certainly believe that if you tell the truth of women's lives, that women's lives have to improve.
So that's quite a big job you took upon yourself, Marilyn.
It's useless. I mean, it was a joke, but I did it. What can you say? I did it.
To try and make the world feel better.
Yeah.
It's a good ambition.
We were really riding high. We thought we were changing the world. It was so great. But it ended.
By the late 70s, the women's movement had made very significant gains. Across the Western world, women had achieved equal rights and legislative change in many areas of their lives.
We have come a long way. Things have changed a huge amount. But we haven't had a revolution.
When I run into people now who, say, oh my goodness, they were active in the 60s, and then they say, and look at you, you're still going. How can you still be, doing that? And I don't know what to answer them. I want to say, how can you not? Is the world okay, okie dokie now?
Women are still oppressed. There is still a lot of work to be done. And it's more difficult now that feminism is a dirty word, and now that most people believe that there are no battles to fight anymore.
There's so much more that needs to be changed, and the new generation is going to have to learn that you can only do it, really, by having a movement, and they're also going to learn, and it's a sad lesson, that you can't jumpstart a movement. Suddenly there's a critical mass of people who feel like they want to do something, along with other people. And you can't fake that, So you could always fake an orgasm. You can't fake a movement.
No one's ever gonna keep me down again. Whoa, yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom for the pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong. I am invincible. I am
Good.
We've done your dirty washing.